afternoon, committee members, staff, and community members watching. I'll now call the February 23rd, 2021 Policy Committee meeting to order. Due to the current federal and state emergency declarations, this meeting is being conducted by electronic means in accordance with Minnesota Statute 13D.021, with some members participating remotely. This meeting is being live streamed on our website, and a recording will be posted there and also run on Channel 15. Before we begin, I'll remind everyone of a few virtual meeting requirements and tips. We will take all votes by roll call. Ryan will serve as our clerk today and call the roll when needed. Board members and staff, please mute yourselves when not talking to avoid background noise. Remember to speak clearly, slowly, and into your microphone. Directors participating remotely, use the raise your hand feature to be recognized. Thank you. Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Director Arneson.
Here.
Director Ali. Director Sarillo.
Here.
Director Ellison.
Here.
Chair Pauly.
Here. Thank you. Next, could I get a motion to approve the agenda with last name for the record?
So moved, Arneson.
Is there a second?
Second, Cerrillo.
Thank you. Our agenda has been moved and seconded. If there's any discussion, please raise your hand to be recognized. Seeing none, Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Yes.
Sarillo.
Yes.
Ellison.
Yes.
Pauly.
Yes. Thank you. That motion carries and we have an approved agenda. Next is approval of minutes from the January 26th, 2021 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second, Ellison.
Thank you. So the minutes have been moved and seconded. If there's any discussion, please raise your hand. Seeing none, Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Yes.
Sarillo.
Yes.
Ellison.
Yes.
Pauly.
Yes. Thank you. That motion carries and the minutes are approved. For our next item, we'll hear a status update on equity and diversity impact assessments, better known as EDIAs. Superintendent Graff, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Pauly. Good evening, board members, members of the public who are watching this evening. For this presentation, we're going to have our Senior Officer of Accountability, Research, and Equity, Eric Moore, provide some background on the context and information, as well as give an update to the board on the recent EDIA work that's been completed in the district. And so we'll take.
See, Chair Ellison, members of the board, Superintendent. This is a very unique experience. First of all, I haven't had a chance to present publicly to anyone in forever, so just bear with me. This is kind of surreal. My pleasure to talk about the Equity Diversity Impact Assessment, some of the progress that we've made really since 2017. And so we'll talk about just a bit of history. The EDI process has been around since 2006. But most recently in 2013, more clearly aligned to the Equity Diversity Impact, actually Policy 1304. Most recent EDIs 2017 was the Athletics EDIA. 2018, as you recall, we have the HR, Human Resources Equity Diversity Impact Assessment. 2019, with the Student Placement EDIA, and so, which brings us to date now. So it's aligned to the Equity Policy 1304. As you see in front of you, there's an activating threshold. At a high level, significantly impacts student learning, impacts all students in the district, all students within an attendance zone, all students within a school, impacts all students within a district A level band, 5,000 more students or 30,000 or 30% of students from a protected class. And you see the also impacted resource allocation. And so we've actually evolved into 4 different processes. We have our first equity, diversity, impact assessment. We now, which is our typical EDIA. And in 2019, we actually started focusing more on policy. And so prior to that, we had more departmental EDIAs. 2019, we decided to focus on policy. We're able to really adjust the daily practices because most policies have a regulation attached to it. So while we're able to look at policy, we're able to focus on the implementation of that policy through the regs. And oftentimes the regulations impact the extent to which a policy is effective or not. So that's our equity, diversity, impact assessment, but that's where you look in the yellow. There's equity considerations for policy. There's also an equity considerations for practices. That's a process in which internally as a district, we're able to, that's why I'm having breathing. Equity considerations for practices, some of the daily work that we do. And then we also have an equity considerations process for budgeting. And so as we do budgeting, we're in the budgeting process now. We review all of our budgets to see the extent to which it's having a disparate impact on different groups. And then when it's the case, we mitigate harm. So we adjust our budgets based upon what we see. And so you see the EDI process. Typically, we start a process in June prior to the upcoming school year. And so we have a 4-part process. We have the board, typically what we're asking is the board requests a full EDI in June. Phase 1, June and July. We do the EDI study in which we're doing our self-examination. And that's typically a year-long process for the EDI. Phase 2, we have an action plan, and I think obviously with the EDI process, we commit to doing the monitoring, which is a phase 3, in which we have a quarterly monitoring process that takes place over 3 to 5 years. It's a 3-year process, I apologize. So there's now a full full request form for the EDIA. Okay. So wanted to spend some time touching upon the Minneapolis Community Education EDIA, which was 2018-2019. And this was an EDIA that we didn't necessarily complete because we shifted to the student placement EDIA as part of the comprehensive district design work. But at the time, we were looking at our community education, and at this time focusing specifically on before school and after school. But these are the areas in which we examined first as part of community education. It also includes the maps, so we took a look at programs in adult ed. We looked at before and after school programming, Minneapolis Kids, youth enrichment, which encompasses a lot of after school programming. We also took a look at beacons. We were taking a look to see the extent to which those programs were equitably distributed throughout the city. All right, so these are just maps in which this is some of the previous work that we did relative to the community education EDIA. Starting with Minneapolis Kids, I think it was, we did have a chance to do a partial EDIA. We brought those results to the EDI committee. At that time, the EDI committee came back and said that it did not necessarily meet the activating threshold. Also, the finding was that Minneapolis Kids at the time wasn't necessarily funded with district dollars. That is, that the revenue was generated primarily through different fees, child care assistance program, and so the committee recommended, pushed it back and said that it didn't necessarily merit an EDI at that period of time, but did want us to take a deeper look. The committee recommended, as you see on the slide, that we do a better job communicating with families regarding Minneapolis Kids, to track student ID, really take a look at focusing on race and ethnicity. And I think that was actually a similar trend in our athletics EDI, doing a better job collecting information so that we can examine issues of equity. Okay, so 2018, 2019, As mentioned, we actually went from a Minneapolis Kids examination to, at that time, looking at the entire community education program. This was during the same period as we were doing the equity, diversity, impact assessment on human resources. And so at the time, we did partial EDIAs, but as I mentioned before, we paused in spring of 2019. But we did complete interviews and focus groups with program leaders and staff. We did program descriptions of the various departments. And we were actually in the process, before we interrupted that, across the departments of identifying challenges and equities that were identified. We did not have a chance to complete all the interviews and focus groups, particularly with community members. But our next step would have been to determine if a full EDI was needed. But again, as I mentioned, we shifted to our priorities on the CDD. I will say, though, that much of some of the beginning research of that EDI on community education, particularly on after-school programming, did influence the work that we did on the Conference of District Design regarding access to after-school programming. So that data did inform some of our recommendations, influencing bell times to make sure that after-school programming was accessible to all students district-wide. And we did make that change to the CDD. And this is just a timeline. In summer of 2019, we did do a full EDI on student placement. And, as part of the process, and this is actually has influenced, as part of that EDI in 2019, the foundation of some of the changes we made in the CDD around student placement. But that EDI is also available. So at this point, I can take questions. Never seen myself on the screen here with a mask. But at this point, I'll take questions, and I'm certainly happy to answer whatever questions you have.
Thank you, Senior Officer Moore. Directors, please raise your hand to be recognized for questions or comments on the EDI update. Director Arneson.
Thank you, and thanks for being here in person. That's nice and a nice change. All right, so I have a couple of discussion items, I guess, and I have 3 or 2.5 maybe. So I'll name them, and then we can address them one at a time. So one, I'm thinking a little bit. So I appreciate this feedback and discussion. One thing I'm noting is that you did a nice job of this has evolved over the years, and I know your department has spent a lot of time and energy making sure it evolves, and so I really appreciate that. From the time when it was kind of just first created. So I recognize that. And so I guess I'd like to discuss something in relation to that. I'm wondering if some of the things you've operationalized, I'm wondering if we need to formalize, perhaps, maybe consider formalizing through regulations or even perhaps policy changes if there's like cleanup language you've kind of maybe discovered in your, or flaws, or maybe something that isn't clear in your work over the years, that maybe there's an opportunity to work through policy. So as we review this policy, I think that'd be a helpful discussion for our committee to have. And related to that, I'm wondering kind of like who or what, if we want to clarify who or what triggers, if we want to be more specific. You noted certainly the way the policy reads, and I think kind of the intention at one point is, for sure we want to consider the equity impact for policy development, but we've also found good benefit on department EDAs. You've mentioned athletics, community ed, human resources. Those are really all more departments, but that helps us develop policy as well. So I'd like to kind of talk through a little bit if we want to be specific about that, if we feel like we need to be specific. And then the other kind of different topic that I'd like to talk a little bit about is the evaluation piece. So you mentioned the 3-step process. You do the EDA, you develop some recommendations, like you implement the recommendations, and then there's a monitoring process. And I am feeling like maybe we need to formalize our, this is pretty new, and so we haven't really completed that many EDAs because it takes a while, as you mentioned, but I think we're a little inconsistent about our monitoring, and I'm wondering if we want to formalize how we monitor that, and maybe that's through we've tried it a couple of different ways. I know we've gone through the committee of the whole, we've had kind of a time period, but maybe we want to use the policy committee as a way to just kind of provide some ongoing monitoring, because of course, if we reach conclusions with the EDA but don't follow through with implementation, then it simply doesn't matter that we've done the EDA. That's kind of a waste of an EDA. So those are kind of the areas I'd be interested in discussing, if you don't mind, Chair, however you want to organize that discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Director Arneson. Anything that Senior Officer Moore you want to add to that or start it off?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I think, the powerful piece that I've learned over the years with the equity, diversity, impact assessment, first is that it's aligned to Policy 1304. I think that there would be value in taking a look at Policy 1304 and making sure that the language is aligned to the work we do. I mean, interestingly enough, the focus on policies was the original intent of the equity, diversity, impact assessment. And then the website over the years added practices and procedures. But the policy 1304 is very clear that this is policy work. But I would just take a second look at 1304, making sure that the language is aligned to where we want to go, I think would be of value. I do think that what the EDI has allowed us to do is not only to looking at policies and having our community-based organizations give us feedback and recommendations as critical friends, but I think what's happened is that, through the work, we maintain our commitment as an organization to continue to look at policies that may not merit a full EDIA. So we are still reviewing internally policies that come up for update. We have an internal team, and the owner of that policy is now reviewing that. And that was the recommendation. As we got to the student placement EDI, one of the recommendations was that our observations that our policies weren't updated on a regular basis. And I think we've had this conversation over the past couple of years. So now every policy has a senior level owner. And that senior level owner, and this is on the yellow equity considerations policies, works with the equity, diversity, impact assessment team. And so you can feel confident that as we're reviewing our policies, we do have a senior level owner, so there's an accountability piece. There's also a second set of eyes, a team that reviews the policies. We also have the budgeting process, which I think is critical. And again, the whole part of the EDI is that you're identifying something you want to do. You're identifying very clearly who it impacts. If it disparately impacts certain groups, how do you mitigate harm? So each of these different processes, the full EDIA, the budgeting, the policies, the practices, you're looking to see if the work we're doing is having a disparate impact. If it is, then what's your plan to mitigate harm? If you can't mitigate the harm, then that's a decision point. But you have to identify the harm, what you're doing or not doing, and then it's front-facing. I think one thing that we have attempted to do that could be codified is that all of our EDIs are front-facing. I think this would be a fantastic place for review of EDIs. The commitment is to monitor the full EDIs quarterly, but we haven't necessarily done that formal presentation to the board. We've provided that information in writing, but if there is a space, and periodically at some committee of the wholes, but this could be a space in which we provide the quarterly updates on the policy, the EDIs. I think that's a great suggestion. I think that would be a way to strengthen the full EDIs.
Thank you, Senior Officer Moore. I see your hand is up. Director Ellison, if you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you so much, Lainey. You may have answered the question, I'm not sure. I want to piggyback off of Director Arneson's comment about the evolution of the EDIA policy, and Senior Officer Moore mentioning that when we first adopted policy 1304, we were focused mainly on policies. I'm wondering if a EDIA of policy 1304 was ever done. Is our tool equitable? Is that a question? Do we need to look at 1304 more and formalize, maybe add to it, take some things out? I don't know.
I think there'd be value in doing a review of 1304. That's the work we do around equity, quite frankly. It's a very powerful policy. I mean, I think, this goes, the policy 1304, I mean, close over a decade ago, we're clearly identifying that the school board is compelling district employees to interrupt institutional racism. I mean, there's some really bold language in policy 1304 that when I started in the district 8 years ago and I saw the policy and I brought that policy forward to folks, I think people were kind of surprised in some regards that an institution wouldn't name institutional racism out front the way we did and then compel people to do it. Now, the power, I think, with policy 1304 that I think we haven't necessarily harnessed as an institution is because it's your policy and we have an EDI process now, that does provide a space to monitor the issues, the areas identified in policy 1304. So it identifies a clear set of metrics that we could come up with to see if we're actually meeting the intent of that policy. And so I think it would be very valuable to review 1304 with the EDI lens. People will be surprised, but there's things, within the policy 1300 regarding teacher of color recruitment and retention. There's areas about advanced academics, the achievement gap, participation in athletics, extracurricular. So I really, and to be quite honest, as we looked at the CDD, Comprehensive District Design, our eye was on policy 13. So in fact, many of the new allocations that we made around the Comprehensive District Design would be aligned to policy 1304. So there's a natural monitoring that would take place between looking at policy 1304, clearly understanding the metrics assigned to policy 1304, aligning those to the metrics we have in our CDD for our target. So I think there would be great value in taking a look at policy 1304. Chair Ellison, I mean, I think it's, and members of the policy committee, I mean, I think it would be a lot of value in that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Arneson, did you have some follow-up comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. So just appreciating those comments, and Director Ellison, you're doing the same, similar theme. So wanting to just kind of determine, I guess, as a committee what we want to do. So we've had this presentation. We've talked about the EDA, and so I'm wondering. It seems like there is value in providing some being a little bit more specific in our policies. I'm just thinking about kind of how we want to handle that as a committee and what we are thinking about that.
Thank you, Director Arneson. Yeah, I think the kind of the impetus for today was to get an update on the EDI process. Where are we? Where have we been? But it is something that I think we really want to dive into in our March meeting and talk about this partial EDIA on the community education and systematizing this review or reporting out on the progress on past EDIAs. So that is something that we really want to dive into in March. And I'm hoping that if committee members have strong feelings that they'll share those. But that's something that we're planning to do.
Okay, great. And if that's something the administration superintendent, what do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to respond. Just recapping some of the points that I think were made by Chair Ellison and Director Arneson. So looking at our evaluation and monitoring, as Senior Officer Moore mentioned, our documents are forward-facing, but part of the process does require us to constantly monitor those, at least for the next 3 to 5 years, if you will. So I think using this space as policy would be a great place to take those down off the website, kind of review where we are with it, update as we need to based on any budgetary changes that we might make annually or adjustments that happen over the course of a school year. So I could definitely see us doing that. Getting some more clarification around how do you initiate an EDIA. I think we've done a better job based on the initial policy and really focusing on our policy being the driving element of an EDIA. I do think that there's still some uncertainty, like does this come from the community and public? Does it come from the board? Does it come from the administration? I think those are all viable options, but who makes that final determination? And then the consideration of how many of those, what is the capacity to do that over the course of a year? And I think we had some strong opinions about what we would be able to deliver on, with EDIAs, and that's where you saw some of the shifting of the community ed one into the different direction. So I think we could certainly offer up some some thoughts around that. And then looking at policy 1304, again, I will tell you, when I came into the district, it was a great opportunity to see this language that was quite both inspirational and aspirational and unique. You didn't see a lot of policies like this in districts across the nation. In fact, in some of the work that we've done with the Wallace Foundation, we had districts reaching out to us and saying, "Your policy is great. You know, this is what we want to copy this. How do we get this going?" And I think that's where we saw the realization that it was words, you know, initially. And so a lot of work has been done over the last several years to take that document and to really make it practical in our work with the EDIA and the committee work that Senior Officer Moore has led with the community members. So I think it would be good to revisit that. I mean, there's language in there that still works for today, but there's also a lot more clarity around our values as a district, and I think solidifying that further in the policy would be good.
So, Chair, I totally support coming back in March or over the next several months and using this opportunity, taking some of the lessons we've learned and actually applying this policy. And that's really the work that you've done over that you've all done over the last few years. So we definitely have lessons learned, and we want this. I think we all share the desire to make this a workable, practical policy that actually is more than just something that's written down. And so I think if we want to clean up and add some specific languages that distinguishes, for example, between the full and the partial and the review and what different things trigger and different opportunities trigger different things. And as far as community education, I completely understand and do note that we use some information to within the CDD, but I think personally think it'd be good to kind of get clarity and to kind of resolve that one way or the other, because we certainly know through the CDD, for whatever reason, we do have, at this moment in time, we have extremely different access to enrichment opportunities, and for better or for worse, after out-of-school time funding is extremely limited, it's continuing to decrease, and it's complicated, and we want to make sure, we have to be very intentional about how we do it, and I personally think we want to be driven by equity when we make those decisions, and so that, I think, warrants making sure we've completed our equity process so we know our clear starting line, especially now that we've created the systems for some different sorts of success. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Arneson. Seeing no further hands, I just really want to thank Senior Officer Moore for this presentation and this discussion. As always, this is an ongoing conversation, especially as we work through our policy review process. But I'm excited to come back in March and check some of these things off the list and really dive deeper. So moving on to new business, let's move on to our next item, which is to take up the recommendation to revise a number of our board governance related policies. As committee members will recall, after spending November and December reviewing these policies, last month we walked through a comprehensive proposal to clean up, reorganize, and revise a number of areas. Given that these policies impact our board's organization and operation, we invited everyone, all board members, to our meeting last month and also opened up feedback on the proposal. And there's been emails sent and other ways for folks to get involved. So I'll now ask for a motion to forward this proposal to the full board with committee recommendation.
So moved, Arneson.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Cerrillo.
Thank you. The proposed changes, which are identified and detailed on the agenda, have been moved and seconded. If there's any discussion or questions, please raise your hand. Director Arneson.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to comment that I think this is well thought out, this entire array of policies. I think it has a lot of common sense, and it's just it's accepted practice. I think it's clear, and I just really want to appreciate, thank you, Chair Polly, for working on this, and Ryan Strack for all the cleanup, all the background work that you did to make sure that this is clean and ready to go. So I think this will be very helpful, and I'm ready to support this.
Thank you, Director Arneson. Seeing no other hands, Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Yes.
Ali.
Yes.
Cerrillo.
Yes.
Ellison.
Yes.
Polly.
Yes. Thank you. So that motion carries, and the proposed revisions are recommended to the full board for a first reading on March 9th. That concludes our agenda for the afternoon. I will now take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Director Arneson. Is there a second?
I second. Ali.
Thank you, Director Ali. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn this meeting. Seeing no hands, Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Yes.
Ali.
Yes.
Sarillo.
Yes.
Ellison.
Yes.
Polly.
Yes. Thank you. So that motion carries and we're adjourned. Our next policy meeting will be on March 23rd. We will be continuing some of this EDA discussion as well as looking at some other policies. Thanks, everyone.